Did Africa have a written language? When discussing African history or Black culture in general, one old narrative and lie people like to bring up is the argument that sub-Saharan Africans never had a written language before colonialism. It's an argument mostly fired up and a narrative mostly pushed by people who already have a certain opinion of Black Africans or Black people in general. What's sad is that when confronted with this lie, many Black people just sit back and take it, giving no arguments in return because many don't know the facts either. So let's discuss it. How true is that statement, and where does it come from? To start, I want to hold your hand when I tell you this. Europe did not have a writing system before the influence of West Asians. This isn't the case for Africa, which had multiple writing systems in place before the arrival of West Asians or Europeans, but we will get to this later. All the European writing systems have West Asian roots. Until numerous cultural influences spread from West Asian regions, Europeans had symbolic systems instead of writing systems. And here is where it gets even funnier. Those West Asian writing systems that influenced Europe, more specifically the Phoenician writing script, were influenced by none other than North and East African writing scripts. Truly a full circle moment. And yet, a continent that had multiple writing systems put in place without the influence of West Asians or Europeans is also the only continent on Earth that is stereotyped as having no written language before European colonization or West Asian influence. Isn't that funny? Before I go into detail about how a system qualifies as a writing systems and who set up those rules, I first want to give you the list of writing systems that are known today and existed before the arrival of West Asians or Europeans in Africa. And since the argument so many people always like to bring up is that it is specifically Black Africans who didn't have a writing system, I will indeed be listing Black African writing systems that existed with zero influence from the outside. So let's start. 1. The Ge'ez script. This is a writing system native to Ethiopia and Eritrea that predates the arrival of West Asians or Europeans in Africa. This script was used at least as early as the 5th century before Common Era and was developed in the Aksumite civilization. Fortunately, it is still in continuous use today. Another fun fact, it is one of the oldest surviving writing systems on Earth. 2. The Meroitic script. This script dates to around 300 before Common Era and was used in modern-day Sudan for the Kush Empire. Like the Ethiopian script, this predates the arrival of West Asians or Europeans in Africa. The script encoded indigenous languages native to the people of Kush at the time. 3. Tifinagh script. This script most likely dates to the first millennium before Common Era and was used among numerous indigenous communities in modern-day Mali, Niger, Chad, Algeria, and Libya. Again, this script also predates the arrival of West Asians and Europeans in Africa. It functioned as both a symbolic system and a writing system. 4. Nsibidi. This was a writing system native to Nigeria and Cameroon, used before the 5th century Common Era, again predating West Asian and European arrival in Africa. This system was also a mix of symbolic and writing elements. For better understanding, let's compare it to texting nowadays. We often mix symbols and words through our use of emojis. What makes this so interesting is the fact that Black African history is so unknown and almost never studied, and yet we still have so many independent writing systems that once existed. Now imagine if people studied or showed an interest in sub-Saharan Africa the same way they do Egypt. I can only imagine what more would be discovered, but I digress. Whilst not every system qualifies as a writing system, every African indigenous group had a system for recording their history, language, traditions, and so on. These systems were sometimes oral, but mostly they were symbolic. This means symbols were written and used to communicate and record information. But here is what people forget. Almost every non-Latin writing system we know of today was first considered by Europeans to be a symbolic system, because these systems needed to be studied to be proven as writing systems. But what were the requirements put in place to analyze whether something is a symbolic system or a writing system? Well, there are 3 important requirements. 1. The system shows structured, repeated sequences or patterns in the symbols, suggesting intentional encoding rather than random marks. 2. The symbols correspond to elements of a spoken language, for instance, sounds, words, or syllables. 3. If the system fully encodes language, it is classified as a writing system. But here is what people don't question enough. Logically, you cannot understand or prove if a symbolic system fully encodes a language if you don't speak or understand that said language. This is the case with most African languages. Europeans back then didn't learn or plan to learn indigenous African languages before saying that Africans had no writing system. Even to this day, most scholars in this field aren't learning or trying to learn a Black African language before claiming that Black Africans didn't have a writing system. The fact is, if the African country isn't Egypt, Morocco, or maybe South Africa, then it often isn't studied. And what's unfortunate is that due to colonialism, only a minority of a minority of a minority can read or understand their native scripts. Just for comparison, if it weren't for Chinese scholars who studied their own native language and native writing system, Europeans today would have believed that those scripts were also just a symbolic system instead of a full writing system. Unlike African systems, the Chinese script was studied by native speakers, meaning scholars from that region studied their own script and were able to determine whether or not it was a writing system because they can read and speak their language, making it possible for them to recognize patterns better and decode the script. The findings of Chinese scholars were later studied by European scholars. When it comes to sub-Saharan Africa, however, the story was different. You had, and still have, European or non-native scholars trying to decode scripts of languages they didn't know, didn't speak, and had no intention of learning. Now, I am not saying that no European was ever able to properly study African scripts. However, to say that many other writing systems are dismissed because of lack of accuracy due to lack of knowledge of that language is no lie. Not every written language has obvious patterns for scholars who do not know the language. Every script has different difficulty levels when it comes to recognizing patterns or decoding. And the higher the difficulty level, the more necessary it is for a native speaker to study it and come on board, which was never the case in the past and still isn't to this day. Just let that sink in for a minute. This is one of the many reasons why sub-Saharan Africa needs to be studied more by sub-Saharan Africans themselves. Maybe then we would know our history well enough to actually develop proper, factual counter-arguments instead of relying on lies. Just imagine how many writing systems could be discovered if native speakers studied their own scripts from the beginning instead of relying on outsiders who couldn't read or speak the languages. Anyway, I hope you enjoy this video, and I hope you now know enough about Africa to challenge those who still claim Africans couldn't read or write before the arrival of West Asians or Europeans. Thank you for watching.